I pushed the door open with my shoulder, juggling my bag, keys, and the takeout box I'd grabbed on the way home. The scent of garlic shrimp was strong enough to make my stomach growl, but the tension that hit me as soon as I stepped inside erased any trace of hunger. Claire's voice carried from the living room, sharp and animated, cutting through the low hum of jazz coming from the speaker. Someone else was laughing, Maddie. They didn't hear me come in. I kicked the door shut, the sound echoing through the loft, and their laughter cut off like a record scratch. The sudden silence felt wrong, like walking into the middle of a conversation you weren't supposed to hear. Claire? I called out, setting the takeout on the kitchen counter and letting my keys clatter against the marble. The sharp sound seemed to amplify the awkward stillness. I moved toward the living room, my steps deliberate. The atmosphere felt heavy, like a storm brewing, and my gut was already telling me something was off. Claire and Maddie were sitting on the couch, and they looked up in unison as I entered. Claire's smile was tight, her eyes darting to Maddie before settling on me. Maddie, on the other hand, looked like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. Wide eyes, fake nonchalance, and hands gripping her wine glass like a lifeline. Hey, Claire said, too casually, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You're home early. Am I? I said, my tone sharper than I intended. I dropped my jacket onto the armchair, scanning the room. An almost empty bottle of wine sat on the coffee table, alongside a plate of untouched cheese and crackers. The air felt charged, like I'd walked in on the middle of something I wasn't supposed to see. What's going on? I asked, keeping my tone even, though my pulse had picked up. Nothing, Claire replied quickly, brushing invisible crumbs off her lap. We were just chatting, catching up. Just catching up? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. My eyes flicked to Maddie, who was now fiddling with her phone like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Claire sighed, the sound tight and impatient. Jason, don't do this. You always think something's wrong when it's not. Maddie was venting about her boyfriend, and I was just listening. That's all. Maddie stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her glass in the process. I should go, she mumbled, grabbing her coat from the back of the chair. Thanks for the wine, Claire. Wait, I said, stepping into Maddie's path as she tried to make a beeline for the door. She froze, eyes darting to Claire for support. Why are you in such a hurry? Jason, let her go, Claire snapped, standing up and moving toward me. She placed a hand on my arm, trying to guide me back. Maddie's not part of this. Maddie didn't wait for me to step aside. She slipped past, muttering something about being late. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. I turned to Claire, crossing my arms. What was that? What was what? She shot back, her voice defensive. She started gathering the glasses and the plate from the table, her movements too fast, too deliberate. Don't play dumb, I said, stepping closer. You both went quiet the second I walked in, and now Maddie bolts like she's running from something. What's going on? Claire hesitated, her hands tightening around the wine glasses. For a second, I thought she might tell me the truth. But then she shook her head, her expression hardening. Not tonight, she said, her voice low. I'll explain everything later, Jason. Please, just let it go for now. Her words hit me like a bucket of cold water. Let it go. I repeated, disbelief lacing my tone. Do you even hear yourself? Whatever this is, I'm not blind, Claire. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Fear? Trust me, she said softly. Just this once, trust me. I wanted to push, to demand answers, but the look in her eyes stopped me. Something was wrong, something bigger than I could piece together right now. Fine, I said finally, my voice clipped. But I'm not dropping this. Not for long. She nodded, her shoulders sagging in relief as she turned toward the kitchen. But the tension in the room didn't dissipate. It clung to the walls, to the air, and I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Claire's vague promises and Maddie's hasty exit leave Jason simmering with questions. What are they hiding, and why does it feel like something's slipping out of his control? The next morning, I woke to Claire already out of bed. The The sound of drawers opening and closing echoed from the closet. I glanced at the clock, 7:12 a.m. way too early for a Saturday. I shuffled out of bed, rubbing sleep from my eyes, and found Claire standing in front of the mirror. She was dressed in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure, her hair pinned back in a way she rarely bothered with anymore. A pair of gold earrings glinted under the warm light. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to mask my irritation. She turned, her face tight with something unreadable. "I need you to drive me somewhere," she said, smoothing the fabric of her dress. "Where?" I pressed, but she was already reaching for her bag. "A restaurant," she said casually, as if that explained anything. "I'll text you the address. Just drop me off, and I'll call when I'm ready to leave." "Claire, what's this about?" She sighed, avoiding my gaze. "Jason, please. I don't have time for questions. Can you just help me out here?" Her tone was sharp, almost pleading, and I knew pushing further would get me nowhere. Reluctantly, I grabbed my keys and threw on a jacket. The address led us to a swanky restaurant downtown, right on the Magnificent Mile. The kind of place where valet attendants in tailored suits practically ran to open car doors. I parked across the street, watching as Claire stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the pavement. My stomach churned as I noticed Maddie waiting near the entrance, dressed just as sharply. They exchanged a quick glance, then walked inside together. Something about the way they moved, hushed, hurried, like they were trying not to draw attention, sent a jolt through me. "Stay out of it," I muttered to myself. But my hands were already gripping the wheel tighter. Against my better judgment, I got out of the car. The late-morning crowd was thick enough to make me blend in as I crossed the street and found a spot near the window. From there, I had a clear view inside. Claire and Maddie were seated at a private corner table with two men in suits. The men screamed corporate power, clean-shaven, slicked-back hair, the kind who wore their ambition like cologne. One of them leaned forward, talking animatedly while Maddie nodded. The other seemed focused on Claire, his smile too polished to be genuine. Claire didn't look relaxed. She was sitting straight, her hands clasped tightly on the table. I pulled out my phone, zooming in just enough to capture a clear shot of the group. My thumb hesitated over the screen before I hit the shutter. The waiter approached with a bottle of wine, and I could tell by the way one of the men gestured that it wasn't some cheap house pour. They clinked glasses, and for a moment everyone smiled, except Claire. She glanced at her phone, her lips pressing into a tight line before slipping it back into her bag. The man beside her leaned closer, saying something that made her shoulders stiffen. My pulse quickened. This wasn't some casual brunch. It was calculated, deliberate, and Claire looked like she was in over her head. I snapped a few more pictures, making sure to capture their faces, the expensive wine, and the tension etched into Claire's posture. After about an hour, the group stood, exchanging handshakes. Maddie left first, her phone pressed to her ear as she disappeared down the sidewalk. Claire lingered, speaking with the man who'd been sitting next to her. He handed her a small envelope, which she slipped into her purse without hesitation. I stepped back, blending into the crowd as Claire exited the restaurant. She looked both relieved and distracted, her steps quick as she scanned the street. I slipped back into the car, watching as she walked to the curb, phone in hand. My phone buzzed seconds later, a text from her. "Pick me up. I'm outside." My heart raced as I pulled up to the curb. She slid into the passenger seat, her gaze distant as she adjusted her seatbelt. "Good lunch?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Yeah," she said, staring out the window. "Thanks for driving me." I wanted to ask her about the envelope, about the men, about the way her entire demeanor screamed wrong, but I held my tongue. Instead, I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing as I drove us home. Whatever this was, it wasn't innocent. And the photos on my phone might just be the key to figuring out what the hell was going on. Jason now has evidence of Claire's mysterious meeting. But the envelope, the stiff conversation, and her refusal to explain leave him certain he's stumbled onto something bigger and far more dangerous. What's in the envelope? Who are the men? And why does Claire seem so distant? The moment we stepped into the apartment, Claire bolted toward the bedroom. muttering something about needing a minute. I stood frozen by the door, my jaw tight, as the sound of her heels clacking against the floor faded. "Claire," I called, setting my keys on the counter with more force than necessary. "We need to talk." No response. My pulse quickened, frustration bubbling to the surface as I shrugged off my jacket and followed her. I found her in the closet, swapping her black dress for a sweatshirt and jeans. The sleek, polished version of her from the restaurant was disappearing right in front of me, replaced by someone deliberately casual. "Seriously?" I said, crossing my arms. "You're just going to pretend nothing happened?" She paused, gripping the hanger in her hand too tightly. "Jason, can we not do this right now?" "No, we're doing this now," I said firmly. "Who were those guys, Claire? And what's with the envelope?" Her head snapped toward me, her expression a mix of annoyance and something else. Guilt, maybe? "You were watching me? Don't turn this around," I shot back. "You've been acting weird for days, and now you're meeting strangers in a fancy restaurant, sneaking envelopes into your purse. What's going on?" She sighed, rubbing her temples like she could massage the conversation away. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," I demanded, stepping closer. "Because right now, it looks like you're hiding something." Claire exhaled sharply and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweatshirt. For a moment, I thought she might finally tell me the truth, but when she looked up, her eyes were guarded. "There's a situation at work," she began slowly. "Something complicated. I didn't want to drag you into it because it's not your problem." "Not my problem?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Claire, I'm your husband. Whatever this is, it is my problem." She hesitated, biting her lip. "Fine," she said finally. "There's been an issue with one of our clients. A legal issue. Maddie knows some people who might be able to help, so she set up the meeting. That's all it was." "And the envelope?" I pressed. "It's just paperwork," she said quickly, too quickly. "I need to review it before we make any decisions." Her words felt rehearsed, like a script she'd memorized. My gut told me there was more to the story, but the steeliness in her tone warned me not to push too hard. "Why couldn't you just tell me that from the start?" I asked, my voice softer now but no less firm. "Because I knew you'd overreact," she said, standing abruptly. She crossed the room and grabbed her phone from the dresser, avoiding my gaze. "And I don't have the energy to fight with you about this." "Overreact," I said, a bitter laugh escaping me. "You've been sneaking around, keeping secrets, and you think I'm the problem?" "I'm not sneaking around," she snapped, her eyes blazing now. "I'm trying to handle something without making it worse. Is that so hard for you to understand?" The tension between us was like a live wire, crackling in the air. I wanted to shake the truth out of her, to demand she stop shutting me out, but something about the way her shoulders slumped made me pause. "Claire," I said, my voice calmer, "if this is just work stuff, why does it feel like you're hiding something bigger?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. "You have to trust me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell you everything when the time is right." I stared at her, trying to read the emotions flickering across her face. Frustration, fear, something I couldn't name. My instinct screamed that she was holding back, that whatever was going on wasn't as simple as she claimed. But I knew better than to push her further. "Not tonight." "Fine," I said tightly. "But this conversation isn't over." Claire nodded, relief flashing briefly in her eyes before she turned and disappeared into the bathroom. The sound of running water filled the silence she left behind. I sank onto the couch, my mind racing. Her explanations felt half-baked, like she was patching a hole in a sinking ship. And the way she'd shut me down when I brought up the envelope? That wasn't nothing. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through the photos I'd taken at the restaurant. The suits, the wine, the envelope, it all painted a picture, but the edges didn't fit. Something about this situation was wrong. And if Claire wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd have to find it myself. Claire's partial confession does little to ease Jason's suspicions. The pieces of the puzzle are falling into place, but the picture they're forming suggests Claire might be in deeper trouble than she's letting on. What's in the envelope, and how far is Jason willing to go to uncover the truth? The invitation came out of nowhere. Claire barely met my eyes when she handed me the embossed card over breakfast. "It's a work thing," she said, her voice clipped. "Maddie's arranging it, and I think it might help if you came." I set down my coffee, studying her.
"Why?"
"I thought this was your not my problem situation." She flinched at the edge of my tone, but didn't respond right away. Instead, she started stacking dishes like her life depended on it. "It's important," she said finally. "I can't explain now, but it'll make sense when we're there." "Claire." "Jason, just trust me," she snapped, her knuckles white around the plate she was holding. The tension in her voice was enough to shut me up.
"For now."
The sun dipped low as we drove out of the city, the gleaming skyline giving way to winding roads and sprawling estates. My fingers gripped the wheel tighter with each mile, the air in the car thick with unspoken words. "Where exactly is this?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Just up ahead," Claire replied, pointing to a driveway flanked by towering iron gates. Beyond them, the glow of string lights illuminated a grand mansion that looked like something out of a movie. A valet approached as soon as I parked, and Claire was out of the car before I could unbuckle. She adjusted her dress, a deep emerald green that shimmered under the lights, and grabbed my arm. "Let's just get through this, okay?" she murmured. The house was buzzing with activity. Inside, the marble floors gleamed, and servers in crisp black uniforms moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. The guests were impeccably dressed, their laughter a little too loud, their smiles a little too sharp. Claire stuck close to me, her fingers gripping my arm as we wove through the crowd. I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching us, their gazes lingering a second too long. "Is this a charity event or a casting call?" I muttered. "Just stay with me," Claire whispered, her eyes darting around the room. A woman in a red gown approached, her smile like a knife. "Claire, darling, you made it," she purred, leaning in for an air kiss. Her eyes flicked to me. "And you must be Jason. Welcome." Before I could respond, a man in a sharp navy suit appeared at her side. He clapped me on the shoulder with a familiarity that set my teeth on edge. "First time here, huh?" he said, his grin too wide. "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it." "What exactly is it?" I asked, my tone cooler than ice. The man chuckled, but the sound was hollow. "You'll see soon enough." We were led into a large sitting room, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and cigars. Couples mingled, their laughter blending with the soft notes of a jazz quartet in the corner. But something about the atmosphere felt wrong. As we took our seats, a man in a white tuxedo stepped to the center of the room, tapping a crystal glass with a spoon. The chatter died instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "thank you for joining us tonight. We're thrilled to welcome new faces." His eyes flicked briefly to me, and I felt Claire's grip on my arm tighten. "As always, tonight is about connection," he continued.
"About trust."
"About breaking barriers." The crowd erupted in applause, and I fought the urge to bolt. The activities started subtly, questions posed to the group about trust and vulnerability. Then, things escalated. A tray of blindfolds was passed around, accompanied by instructions that made my stomach twist. "This isn't what I signed up for," I hissed to Claire as a blindfold was handed to her. "Jason, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just stay calm." "Calm?" I shot back, my voice low but furious. "What the hell is this?" The man in the white tuxedo clapped his hands, drawing the room's attention. "Now let's begin." I didn't wait to find out what begin meant. I grabbed Claire's wrist, pulling her to her feet. "Jason." "We're leaving," I snapped, steering her toward the door. Heads turned as we passed, whispers rippling through the crowd. I didn't care. All I knew was that I had to get us out of there. Once we were outside, I rounded on her. "What the hell was that?" "Jason, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Explain?" I laughed bitterly. "You brought me to a glorified cult meeting, Claire. What the hell are you involved in?" Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. It's not like that, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know it would go this far. I swear. Then what? I demanded. What did you know? She hesitated, her hands trembling. I needed their help, she admitted. They have connections, resources. I thought I could keep it professional, but what? I barked. Her silence said everything. Jason pulls Claire out of the mansion, but the cracks in their relationship deepen. Her partial confession only raises more questions. What help did she need, and why would she risk everything to get it? Whatever answers she's hiding, Jason knows one thing. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The drive home was silent except for the hum of the tires against the pavement. Claire sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her arms crossed, staring out the window as if the passing city lights could shield her from my questions. My grip on the steering wheel tightened with every block, my knuckles white under the streetlights. I couldn't stop replaying the scene at the mansion. The blindfolds, the murmurs of the crowd, Claire's trembling hand in mine as I dragged her out. None of it made sense, and her refusal to explain only fueled my anger. Are you going to say something? I finally asked, my voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. I don't know what you want me to say, she replied, her tone flat but laced with exhaustion. I want the truth, Claire. I snapped, glancing at her briefly before turning back to the road. No more dodging, no more excuses. What the hell was that tonight? She let out a shaky breath, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her dress. Can we not do this while you're driving? Oh, we're doing this now, I said, pulling into our driveway and cutting the engine. The car fell silent, the weight of the conversation looming over us like a storm cloud. Claire got out without another word and headed toward the door. I followed close behind, slamming the car door harder than necessary. As soon as we stepped inside, I dropped my keys on the counter and spun around to face her. Start talking? I demanded. Jason, No. I interrupted, my voice rising. You don't get to Jason, your way out of this. You dragged me into something tonight that... I stopped, running a hand through my hair, trying to keep my anger in check. You need to explain.
Now.
Claire stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself. For a moment, she looked like she might break, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. It's about the business, she said finally, her voice trembling. What business? I asked, my frustration mounting. The boutique, she replied, glancing at me briefly before looking away. We're in trouble, Jason. Financial trouble. My stomach dropped. What kind of trouble? Claire hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. I took out a loan last year, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. To expand, to keep things running. But the numbers didn't add up the way I thought they would. And then Maddie said she knew someone who could help. And that someone is tied to whatever that was tonight? I asked, my tone colder than I intended. She nodded slowly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said, her voice breaking. They offered resources, connections I couldn't get anywhere else. I thought I could manage it, but what? I demanded, taking a step closer. What's the catch, Claire? Because you don't end up at a place like that without strings attached. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. They want me to host events, she admitted. Private gatherings, networking sessions. I thought it would be harmless, just an extension of what we do at the boutique. But the more involved I got, the more it felt wrong. Wrong how? I pressed. Claire looked up at me, her face pale and streaked with tears. The people they bring in, the things they talk about, it's not business, Jason. It's manipulation. They trade favors, secrets. They pull strings to control people. Her words hit me like a gut punch. And you're a part of this now. I didn't have a choice, she cried, her voice rising. We're drowning in debt, Jason. I didn't know what else to do. I thought. She stopped, her chest heaving as she fought to steady her breathing. I thought I could fix it before you ever found out. The room felt unbearably small, the air thick with everything unsaid. I took a step back, needing space to think, to breathe. You should have come to me. I said finally, my voice low but firm. We could have figured something out together. Claire shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. What? With what money, Jason? Your paycheck barely covers the mortgage. We couldn't even afford Christmas last year without cutting corners. I didn't want to be the reason we lost everything. Her words stung, but the anger bubbling inside me wasn't just at her. It was at the situation, at the choices that had led us here. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd crossed a line, one that couldn't easily be uncrossed. Do you even hear yourself? I said, my voice trembling with frustration. You're involved with people who use power to manipulate others, Claire. How do you think this ends? She didn't answer, her silence more damning than any words could have been. I stared at her, my heart pounding as doubts began to creep in. Could I still trust her? Could we even fix this? Or had the damage already been done? I don't know if we can come back from this, I said finally, the words heavy on my tongue. Claire's eyes widened, fresh tears spilling down her face. Jason, please, she whispered. I'm trying to make this right. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, the weight of her confession pressing down on me like a vice. Jason's world is shaken as Claire reveals the full extent of her entanglement with this shady organization. But her partial explanations and justifications only deepen the rift between them, leaving Jason questioning everything. Can he trust her again, or is their marriage already beyond saving? The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Claire had already left for work, or at least that's what she said when she walked out with barely a word. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my cold coffee, my mind churning. Her confession the night before played on a loop in my head, but there was one detail I couldn't ignore: the way she had dodged my questions. She told me just enough to pacify me, but not enough to give me the full picture. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding more. It started as a nagging thought, then grew into an urge I couldn't resist. Claire's laptop sat on the counter, its sleek frame gleaming under the morning light. She rarely used it at home, which made it easy for me to forget it was there. I hesitated for only a second before flipping it open. Her email was still logged in. My fingers hovered over the trackpad as guilt flickered in my chest. But it wasn't enough to stop me. The subject lines hit me like a slap. Confirmation. Event scheduled for April 15th. Private agreements. Follow-up required. Compensation arrangements. My heart pounded as I opened the first email. The message was brief, but the language was cryptic, referring to secured partnerships and exclusive access. The attached document listed names, clients, I guessed, along with payment amounts that made my stomach churn. One name stood out: Richard Keller, the man in the white tuxedo from the mansion. I scrolled further, each email worse than the last. Payments were labeled as honoraria or event expenses, but they were clearly bribes. Claire was facilitating deals between these people, deals that didn't just involve money. There were mentions of exposure management, leverage, and discretion. Whatever this was, it was bigger and darker than I'd imagined. Before I could process the full scope, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from an unknown number. Stop digging. You won't like what you find. My blood ran cold. The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. Claire's heels clicked against the floor, the rhythm familiar but unwelcome. I slammed the laptop shut and stood just as she walked into the kitchen. She froze when she saw my face, her eyes flicking to the laptop. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Shouldn't I be asking you that?" I shot back, my voice louder than I intended. "What the hell is all of this, Claire? Private deals? Bribes? Leverage? Is that what your help looks like?" Her face went pale. "Jason, I can explain." "Then explain," I demanded, stepping closer. "Because right now, it looks like you're working for criminals." Claire's hands trembled as she set her bag on the counter. "It's not what you think," she said weakly. "Then tell me what it is," I said, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're neck deep in something illegal. And you're dragging us both down with you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't let up. You said this was about saving the business. You lied to me, Claire. You've been lying this whole time. I didn't have a choice, she cried, her voice breaking. They came to me after I defaulted on the loan. They said they could fix everything, but I didn't realize what I was getting into. I shook my head, disbelief and anger warring inside me. And now what? You're their puppet?
Claire looked down, silent.
The silence was shattered by my phone buzzing again. Another text from the unknown number. You're making this worse for her. Stand down. I held the phone up to Claire, my hand shaking. Who the hell are these people, Claire? How do they know I'm looking into this? Her eyes widened in panic as she read the message. Jason, you need to stop. Please.
No, isnapat.
Not until I know exactly what's going on. Who's Keller? What's his deal? Before she could answer, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered, my heart pounding. Mr. Hart, a calm male voice said. I suggest you stop snooping into matters that don't concern you. For your sake and Claire's. My throat tightened. Who is this? The man chuckled, the sound chilling. Let's just say I'm someone who doesn't appreciate meddling husbands. Walk away now, and we'll forget this happened. Keep pushing, and things will get complicated. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone in my hand, my mind racing. What did they say? Claire whispered, her voice trembling. I met her gaze, my jaw clenched. That I should stop. That I'm putting you in danger. What the hell have you gotten us into, Claire? She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she choked out. I took a step back, the weight of everything crashing down on me. The lies, the secrets, the threats, it was too much. I can't do this, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Jason, please, she begged, reaching for me. No, I said, pulling away. This ends now. I'm not letting these people control our lives. Jason resolves to take matters into his own hands, but the shadowy threats and Claire's pleas leave him questioning how far he's willing to go. With danger closing in, the stakes have never been higher, and the cracks in their marriage are now impossible to ignore. The plan was simple, at least on paper. I spent the next few days combing through Claire's emails, texts, and financial records. Every cryptic message, every payment transfer, every suspicious name was cataloged and cross-referenced. It was a labyrinth of deceit, but one thing became clear. Claire wasn't just a pawn in this scheme. She'd crossed a line, and the people she was tangled up with weren't the kind you could walk away from unscathed. I couldn't let this slide. For her. For me. For the life we'd built that now felt like it was crumbling. Late one night, when Claire was asleep, I drove to the storage unit I'd rented under a fake name. The small, dimly lit space had become my war room, a stark contrast to the life we pretended to live back home. My evidence was spread out across the folding table, photos from the mansion, screenshots of her conversations, financial records that traced the money to offshore accounts. The deeper I dug, the darker it got.
Bribes.
Blackmail. Even rumors of violence against those who didn't play along. And at the center of it all was Richard Keller, the man in the white tuxedo. I couldn't let him win. The breakthrough came when I found an encrypted email chain between Keller and someone named Sparrow. After hours of trying passwords, I cracked it using Claire's birthday, another bitter reminder of how far she'd strayed. The emails were a goldmine. Plans for a new scheme involving fake investments. Names of key players. A date and location for the next meeting. It was happening tomorrow night. I didn't tell Claire where I was going when I left the next evening. She was in the kitchen, sipping tea and staring at her phone, her face pale and drawn. I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. I'll be back late, I said, grabbing my jacket. Where are you going? She asked, her voice hesitant. Work stuff, I lied, the words tasting bitter. Don't wait up. The meeting was set to take place at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a cliché, but effective for people who didn't want prying eyes. I parked a block away and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. Through a broken window, I could see them, Keller, his men, and a handful of others seated around a table. Documents and cash were spread out before them. The tension in the room was palpable, even from where I stood. I snapped a few photos and hit record on the audio device I'd hidden in my pocket. This was it. The proof I needed to blow their operation wide open. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. A hand clamped down on my shoulder, and before I could react, I was shoved against the wall. Well, a familiar voice drawled. Mr. Hart, isn't it? I turned to see Keller himself, flanked by two of his goons. His polished smile was gone, replaced by something darker. I warned you, he said, shaking his head. You couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? Go to hell. I spat, struggling against the grip of the men holding me. Keller chuckled. Oh, Jason, this isn't about me anymore. This is about Claire. She's the one who dragged you into this mess, isn't she? My stomach churned as he pulled out his phone and pressed a button. The screen lit up with a live feed, our living room. Claire was sitting on the couch, oblivious, while one of Keller's men stood in the corner, watching her. If you want her to stay safe, Keller continued, his tone icy, you'll hand over whatever evidence you've collected. Right now. I froze, my mind racing. The evidence was my only leverage, but if I handed it over, Claire and I would be trapped forever. If I didn't, I'll give you the files, I said, my voice steady despite the panic clawing at my chest. But you let her go. You leave us alone. Keller smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're in no position to negotiate, Jason, but I'll consider it. They dragged me into the warehouse, throwing me down in front of the table. The men inside turned to stare, their expressions ranging from amused to irritated. This guy's been snooping, Keller announced, tossing my phone onto the table. Let's see what he's got. One of his men started scrolling through the files, and my heart sank as he opened the photos and recordings. But then an idea struck. Check the email files, I said, my voice loud enough to carry. Keller frowned. What email files? I smirked, feigning confidence. The ones I sent to a friend before I got here. Just in case something happened to me. Keller's expression darkened, and he motioned for his men to search my phone. Of course, they wouldn't find anything. The files were still safe on a cloud account I hadn't accessed from my device. You're bluffing, Keller said, but his tone betrayed doubt. Am I? I shot back. You think I'd come here without a backup plan? For a moment, the room was silent, the tension thick enough to choke. Keller's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. Whatever he saw there rattled him. Deal with him, he barked, turning away. The goons grabbed me again, dragging me toward the exit. My pulse thundered in my ears as I realized I was out of time. As they opened the door, the distant sound of sirens filled the air. One of the men started, but I used the distraction to break free, elbowing him in the ribs. I bolted into the night, the sound of chaos erupting behind me. Write in the comments, did the sirens mean help was coming, or was the danger far from over? And what would Claire's role in this fallout mean for their fractured relationship? One thing was certain. The reckoning wasn't over yet.